is probably, if you think of it, the greatest comeback in American history. But it's not going to stop here. It's going to keep going because so many places are closed.
President Trump taking a victory lap today after the positive job numbers. But if he goes looking at other numbers, he's probably not going to like what he sees. First of all, the clock is ticking. We're now down to just 151 days until the election. And it's pretty clear that if the election were held today, Joe Biden would be the next president. His lead is now up to more than 7 points in the national poll averages. And when you look back to the same point in other recent presidential campaigns, this is easily the largest lead any candidate has had at this point in the race in this century. Not every frontrunner here went on to win, but no one had to overcome this large gap either. But like I always remind you about polling right now, these numbers are usually soft until Labor Day, and especially so in the midst of chaotic news events like a pandemic or widespread protests. Then again, with the exception of a brief blip, Biden's lead has been 5 points or larger since February. Here to discuss, Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins. Michael served on the presidential campaigns of both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Thanks for joining us. So you just heard me say not to trust the polls right now, that everything is still changeable. Then I saw this from the CBS poll. They asked the right direction, wrong track question, one of the oldest, most predictive questions that pollsters ask. And wrong track was 39 points up. 67% said we're on the wrong track. 28% said the right direction. No sitting president has or can win re-election with those numbers. So I guess my question is this actually where we are right now? Can we start to believe these numbers, or will things reset as we get closer to the fall?
Well, whenever I've looked at poll numbers, I always see them as a snapshot of that moment. They don't tell you a lot about what's going to happen in the future, and they're not very indicative of what's happened in the past. But in that moment, they tell you where the American public is. I think here we don't even have to really look at the poll numbers. You can look at our TV screens and look in the streets of America, and you're seeing Americans of all race, all sex, all age, and all creed showing up and protesting. And I think that's having two effects. One, it's uniting the Democratic Party, it's uniting independents. But I think also you're seeing a large older crowd, an older white crowd that had already begun to leave the president because of his response to COVID, see their grandkids, see their kids being shot with tear gas and pepper balls on national TV by the military. And I think you're going to see them abandon the president as well.
So how should both campaigns be responding to the news developments and also to those numbers in the polls?
Well, I think the Biden campaign is doing exactly what it should do. It should respond to the president and offer a positive alternative. And if I were the Trump campaign, I would start looking at Mike Pence and seeing whether he was someone who could actually be at the top of the ticket, because I don't see any behavior from the president that's going to be able to help his cause. The more he makes these protests violent by sicking the military on protesters, the lower his numbers are going to go. The more he ignores the effects of coronavirus, the lower his numbers are going to go. And given his comments over the last 3.5 years, but specifically over the last couple of weeks, any increase he may have seen among African Americans is going to completely disappear.
Trump's walk to the church Monday night and his bizarre photo op holding the Bible is one of a number of other actions that he's done recently where he's clearly making a play to religious voters. Now, reports show that his numbers are down among evangelicals, but also way down among white Catholic voters, which is a key voting bloc in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin. Those are voters he really shouldn't have to convince, sort of like the president campaigning in Mississippi or Oklahoma. What does that tell you about the state of his campaign and what he's sensing about potential weakness right now?
It's telling you that he's seeing his poll numbers, and what you're seeing is people of faith don't want the president bastardizing their faith. When you use it to score political points, when you use it to oppress people, you're going to lose those religious supporters. And Catholics, along with Methodists, Baptists, have always been people who've been civic-minded, and you're now seeing that, especially among the Catholic community, who has been so integral in urban communities and helping lift up African American communities. I think that's something that you're really seeing the president overplay his hand with.
As for Joe Biden, we saw him emerge this week after more or less 2 months at his home in Wilmington. He went to a church this week. He's expected at the George Floyd funeral next week. There is a chance, though, that he risks becoming essentially a protest candidate. Then again, that might work for him if the election is, as Biden would want, a referendum on the president. How should he be planning the rest of his campaign?
So I think he should offer a split screen view. When Trump goes on and talks about the unemployment numbers and how George Floyd from his grave would be happy to see these numbers, I think it's smart for Joe Biden to get out and talk about how disgusting it is for someone to say that, especially the president of the United States in the middle of racial upheaval. I think when the president goes up and lies about coronavirus, Joe Biden should get up and do a press conference and show what a real leader would look like. And I think that's what he's been trying to do. And now that we're kind of opening things up slowly and people are able to get out more, I think he's going to be able to use his platform more. It's hard when you're going up against an incumbent president who knows how to dominate news lines and knows how to kind of suck in all the oxygen. It's hard for somebody like Joe Biden to be able to compete with that from his home.
He can't just be not Trump. He has to put forward proposals of his own and convince people that he's a better option, correct?
Absolutely. And, Joe Biden has been very successful at putting forth policy provisions. He's adopted platforms of Elizabeth Warren. There's been conversations between the Biden campaign and Pete Buttigieg in adopting his plan. I think what we're going to see is broad policy prescriptions about things that we hope can happen. I think one of the problems we saw during the primary was there was a split between Democrats, those who had aspirational goals and those who were more moderate, who only wanted to do the things that they believed were realistic. Well, we're seeing now the possibilities are endless. And as more Americans become more frustrated and more Americans become disillusioned with the government, there's going to be a desire to go big. And I think that's what you're going to see from Joe Biden.
Finally, Michael, Trump was basically all in on the economy before the virus hit. And if the economy rebounds, and we got some indications of positive economic numbers today, that may give people a sense of hope, and he may try to ride the economy again. You also have these protests. We still don't know how that plays out, but you can make plausible arguments that both issues could help either candidate, which means that messaging may be key here. How do you see this playing out?
I think at the end of the day, this is just going to be a referendum on whether Americans want another 4 years of Trump. We had a solid economy coming into the Trump administration, and the president managed to destroy that by his response to coronavirus. I think we certainly had racial upheaval, but not to the levels we're seeing now. And the president has intentionally inflamed those over the last 3.5 years. And I think people are tired of that. I think there is a notion among Americans that they want to be able to go back to the movie theaters and turn off their phone for 2 hours and not worry the country is going to burn down, that they can go back to Thanksgiving dinner and not worry about a fist fight happening over Thanksgiving dinner. I think people are emotionally exhausted. And these next 6 months, I think, are going to be taxing on all of us.
151 days to go. Michael Starr Hopkins is a Democratic strategist. Michael, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And up next, while everyone is focused on COVID and the protests, there is a lot of other news out of Washington that's not getting the attention it deserves. After the break, a major story that's under the radar, but after this, it won't be.